Hey everybody, David Borys here. Before we begin, I wanted to take a minute to ask you to check us out on Patreon. It's a great way to support this podcast because if you become a patron at patreon.com, you get early ad-free releases and exclusive behind-the-scenes bonus content you won't hear anywhere else. Patreon is a safe and secure way to support the podcast on a monthly basis. It helps me keep the show growing, and it helps me keep the show going. So become a patron today at patreon.com/hostilehistory. Okay, let's get to the show.
At ZocDoc, we know being a healthy adult is like living in a video game. Every day has side quests, taxes, laundry, birthdays. And just when you're leveling up, you have to book a doctor. The insurance portal crashes. They put you on hold. Your doctor doesn't take your plan. Game over. We see you, so we made booking a doctor easy. Download ZocDoc. Search by specialty, insurance, and availability. Book instantly. No cheat codes required. Find a doctor you love with ZocDoc.
I see you.
Avatar: Fire and Ash is now streaming on Disney+. It's the film critics are calling the best Avatar yet.
Yeah! Go, 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 go!
A true epic and completely jaw-dropping.
This is the only pure thing in this world.
Return to Pandora on Disney+.
It will be an adventure for the whole fam.
And watch the Oscar-winning phenomenon at home.
This is sick!
Avatar: Fire and Ash, now streaming on Disney+. Rated PG-13.
The room was dark except for the soft flicker of an aging television casting long shadows across the walls. Curled beneath a worn blanket, a young boy sat cross-legged on the carpet, absent-mindedly clutching a bowl of popcorn that had long since been forgotten. He had no idea that the next 2 hours would change the course of his life forever. The screen faded to black. Then, a yellow scroll that slowly recedes into the distance and disappears towards a vanishing point in the stars provides just enough context to launch the young viewer into the adventure. Before he had time to absorb the implications of a galactic civil war, the film drops him into the silence of space. And then, from the infinite blackness, the camera slowly tilts downward to reveal the blue and white planet. For a brief moment, the scene appears calm, except the music tells you otherwise. Moments later, a white spaceship races overhead, pursued by enemy fire. Just as it disappears from view, an enormous ship enters the frame, and it keeps coming. Its massive hull stretches across the screen for what feels like an eternity, while dwarfing everything beneath it. The sheer size difference between the two ships instantly communicates overwhelming power, and the young boy sits with his mouth wide open. He has never seen anything like this before, and he is about to journey into a vast, lived-in universe that had existed long before the opening credits and would continue long after the story ended. When the credits finally rolled, the room looked exactly as it had before. The television clicked off, the house was quiet, and the boy sat frozen. Without realizing it, what he just experienced would shape his imagination, inspire his passions, and remain with him for the rest of his life. I'm David Borys, and this is Hostile History. Today, we are traveling to a galaxy not so far, far away to unpack one of the defining stories of the modern age with the help of broadcaster, comic writer, and lifelong fan, Fred Kennedy. This is Star Wars Unpacked. There are only a handful of moments in film history when audiences collectively realize they're witnessing something entirely new. Star Wars was one of those moments. As you know from our previous episode, when George Lucas's masterpiece hit screens in the summer of 1977, cinema was never quite the same again. Drawing inspiration from mythology, Flash Gordon's serials, Akira Kurosawa's samurai films, classic westerns, and the hero's journey, Star Wars blended old storytelling traditions with groundbreaking visual effects. The story, however, was largely shaped by real-world events. From the Vietnam War to the end of the Cold War to the peacekeeping of the 1990s to 9/11 and the ensuing conflicts that followed, Star Wars has always reflected the moods and attitudes of society, which means it has been influenced by our ever-changing and ever-present conflicts. In 1977, it was a cultural watershed and helped usher in the era of the modern blockbuster. Nearly 50 years later, Star Wars has grown from a single film into a sprawling universe of movies, television series, novels, comics, video games, toys, and one of the most passionate fan communities in the world. It has inspired fierce debates, unforgettable characters, technological innovation, and no shortage of controversy. And Fred Kennedy has been on the journey with Star Wars for most of his life.
You know, the first time I ever watched Star Wars was on TV, actually. I watched them on television before I even had them on VHS. And then to see the evolution into animated stuff, and then to realize that there's Star Wars that's being made that's not for me anymore. I think that Star Wars fans need to accept that there's a huge multi-generational audience, and different Star Warses are for different demographics. Whereas it used to be one thing, it's now many things.
Aside from being a lifelong fan, Fred is one of Canada's best-known radio personalities. He's widely recognized as Fearless Fred on Q107 and is often taking part in comic book conventions across North America as both a host and a creator behind such works as Dead Romans for Image Comics, The Fourth Planet, and his latest offering, The Florida Hippopotamus Cocaine Massacre. His storytelling often showcases his passion for history, which was ignited during his childhood in Belgium, where visits to Roman ruins left a lasting impression. Kennedy's diverse talents also extend to voice acting and writing for video games, including contributions to the Assassin's Creed Visionaries series. He has also dabbled in podcasting, where he really got to explore the Star Wars universe in Mud 79.
There are many different types of stories you can tell in the Star Wars universe, and I think they're all incredibly valid. And I think that Star Wars nerds need to stop expecting the same thing all the time. Not everything can be Andor. Not everything needs to be Andor.
Yeah.
You can have your Mandalorians and Grogus, and you can have your Andors, and they're all awesome. You know, it's like pizza. It's always good.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. And I think what's really interesting about that is, because if you remember when parts 1, 2, 3 came out, a lot of purists were really angry at the sort of catering to the kids, especially that 1 and 2 seemed to do, you know, the young Anakin's life. Obviously, part 3 gets really dark, obviously. But there was this sort of uproar about it. And then when they sold to Disney, everyone's like, oh, now this is going to be for the kids. And of course, Grogu is a cute little, Yoda-like alien, and that's a great toy to sell. But the point here is that there's always been Star Wars for the kids and then Star Wars for the adults, and they sort of weave around each other. There's no sort of like, today we're doing this, tomorrow we're doing this. It's like, this is something new coming out, and it could be for all ages or only certain demographics.
The pod racing scene in episode 1, that had its groundwork laid in the Droids animated series. And I don't think a lot of people realize that.
No, I didn't know that.
But in the Droids series, I don't know if you remember, in Star Wars episode 4 in New Hope, there's the spy who sees them going in, and that's the one that alerts the Empire about what's going on with the Millennium Falcon. That character was a racer in the Droids series who rode this super fast land speeder called the White Witch. And I remember watching episode 1 in theaters being like, this is just like that episode of Droids. Like, it totally clicked for me, man.
That's hilarious.
And I'm probably screwing up minor details there, by the way. But in my brain, that's headcanon. That's the way it all works in my brain.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I mean, I think there's so many... one of the great things, and I know nowadays Easter eggs are popular in all sorts of movies, but Star Wars has always been doing that, dropping in little connections to various series characters, like the most random, and even, we'll get into the expanded universe, but even like cameos in a movie of a character who in the expanded universe is actually a major character and things like that. So these little bits and pieces, these little details, bits and bobs, that's kind of part of the entire experience of the Star Wars medium.
Absolutely. And I think that the hardcore fans love that stuff. There's always that one meme about Star Wars fans, and it's like Glub Turdo, and it's like Star Wars fans are like, oh, there he is. There he is. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, I get it. And I am that guy. I do that too. Like, I get so excited about that stuff. But I feel like I don't understand the constant negativity of Star Wars fans. Like, dude, it's Space Wizards, man. Like, put it in your back pocket. It's fine. It's
funny because it almost seems like the most diehard Star Wars fans is where the most hate comes from on different shows, depending what they do. Like the general audience might be like, I didn't really like it, or I did like it, or whatever. But it's like the diehards that really have the visceral, angry reactions to something that doesn't fit within their realm of what Star Wars should be.
Yeah, I don't get that. I'm weird in that I can watch something and not really like it, but appreciate the ideas that it is putting forth. I know that The Last Jedi was one of those touchstone internet anger moments. Did I like the movie? Not really. And I thought a lot of complaints were kind of valid, but I also thought that it did some of the most brilliant world building Star Wars has ever seen. The idea with Canto Bight and all the casino stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that is something that I, as a Star Wars fan, have been thinking about and obsessed with forever. It's like the idea of the transition of the Republic to the Empire isn't going to affect everybody the same. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? And I love that was the first time we'd ever really seen that, the same people selling weapons to both sides. And if you actually take a look in deep Star Wars lore about the companies and the corporate structures that make those weapons, that's been around forever, but nobody's really brought it into the mainstream. It was all of the expanded universe footnote stuff,
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that really stands out to me in the Star Wars universe is the fact that the Republic or the fall of the Republic into the Empire, then the fall of the Empire into the Republic, and then the emergence of, the new Empire as it challenges this sort of weakened Republic. And that narrative is not clean and simple. And it's like day one, it's the Empire, day two, the Republic, day three, the New Order, whatever, all this stuff coming out. And now the movies and certainly the shows and the books, especially the expanded universe and the books, have tackled the messiness of what does that mean? Which is what you're referring to there, which is far more, I understand it's Space Wizards, but far more realistic. That is how it would work in a real situation, right?
Absolutely. And that was exactly what I was dealing with when I did Mud 79, was the idea of how does this affect the people that are on the fringes? People miss out on the scale and scope of the Star Wars universe and what has been established, and how most of the Star Wars universe is not on Coruscant. We always focus on Coruscant. We always focus on Tatooine. We always focus on Yavin 4. But there's this massive galaxy out there. There's trillions of people that live within the Republic and then eventually the Empire. And what is it like for those people? What is the difference between the Republic to the Empire for them?
I'm not giving up.
I am selling the building.
The final season of FX's The Bear.
The restaurant is flooded.
Everything's either gonna be okay.
No, stop!
Or not.
We are outgunned and we are outmanned, but we have each other.
FX's The Bear, the final season. All episodes now streaming on Disney+.
Your team just added its 67th AI tool, and also your 67th security blind spot. The good news? The Vanta agent works like a GRC engineer in the background, finding every app your team uses, scoring the risk, and drafting fixes for you. Vanta is the platform used by over 16,000 fast-moving companies like Ramp, Cursor, and Harvey, who are shaping the future with AI and staying ahead of AI risk. Get started at Vanta.com.
At ZocDoc, we know being a healthy adult is like living in a video game. Every day has side quests, taxes, laundry, birthdays, and just when you're leveling up, you have to book a doctor. The insurance portal crashes, they put you on hold. Your doctor doesn't take your plan. Game over. We see you, so we made booking a doctor easy. Download ZocDoc, search by specialty, insurance, and availability. Book instantly. No cheat codes required. Find a doctor you love with ZocDoc.
Fred's podcast, Mud 79, takes place 4 years after the end of the Clone Wars and before the rise of the Galactic Empire. In the movies and TV shows, that transition is depicted primarily between the Clone Wars animated series and Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Mud 79 follows a 17-year-old Solomon Kwai, whose platoon unit is deployed to a planet on the Outer Rim where they face separatist forces. Solomon starts out as an optimistic and idealistic soldier, but the realities of war and the moral gray area of the battle space begin to change him. The story draws inspiration from history and memoirs like Blood Red Snow, which is a unique day-to-day account of the common German soldiers' experience on the Eastern Front during the Second World War. Parts of the battle scene Solomon Kwai is a part of drew on understandings of Soviet battle tactics. Fred's story was also inspired by the US invasion of Iraq in the early 2000s and the relationship between US forces and Kurdish forces in northern Iraq. It was meant to be a story on a planet so obscure that it would never even make it into official Star Wars canon.
Small scale stories are the things that I wanted to see more of. And that is what I loved so much about Andor, was it so focused on little people making big changes by being the little cog. And there was the main guy, the spy master in Andor. I always forget his name. But there was all the talk about, was he one of the Jedi guards in the temple, because you had the Jedi guard mask that was in his store. And part of me wanted that. But the way they paint him as just a guy who was an Imperial soldier who realized, guys, we've gone too far, and doing his best to correct it. I thought, despite that not being what I wanted, I did want him to be this like cool, is he morally gray Jedi guy who's cut himself off with the Force. I did really appreciate the intent of making him just a human, just a regular person. And I think that the impact of that to anybody viewing is like, you can be a little person, you can be a small wheel in the machine, but you can still break the machine, you know? Yes. And it's like, I thought that Andor was so profound. I always will argue that Rebels is perfect Star Wars, but my favorite Star Wars is Andor, which is essentially Rogue One, if not just for Cassian Andor's incredible jacket selection. Like the writing was incredible. Like it's so good because all these little people affecting big change is so strong, because before that, the narrative in Star Wars was you can do everything you want, but unless there's a Jedi, it's not going to. And that's even the strike through in the Thrawn trilogy is they need a former Jedi clone to Jedi meditate and improve the performance of everybody in the fleet. You know what I mean? And that's what made the Emperor so good, is he could reach out and enhance everybody's ability. But you don't need that. You just need will and determination. You know what I mean? And that is powerful stuff right there.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great segue because into a discussion about this past episode, because we're talking about Star Wars reflecting reality and the world around it. And you listened to the episode, you had in advance listened to it, and I'm interested, as someone super knowledgeable about Star Wars, but also, as I've been told by our mutual friends, also a bit of a military history guy as well. How did this episode, what aspects of this episode resonated with you when you're listening to this more historical look at the way Star Wars reflects the world around us?
Coming from a military household, was watching Ken Burns' documentary series, Vietnam, about these guys that they volunteered, like they grew up in these households and they were like, oh, my dad fought in the Second World War. His best friends were the guy he went to war with. My cousins went to Korea. Their best friends are the guys they went with. Now this is my time. Vietnam is my time. And then they get there and they feel as though they've been sold a false bill of goods. It is not soldiers marching into Paris with rose petals falling from windows. It is not that. It is the opposite of that. And that idea really spurred, because my thought process was invariably there were guys joining the Imperial war machine because they'd grown up on the stories of the Republic, of fighting the Trade Federation. And to them, it's still the same thing. You know what I mean? It's just a different flag. That's their thought process going into this. And when you watch Star Wars, that dance between the Republic to the Empire, does that make the rebellion like the Trade Federation? And it really makes the Emperor's schemes and playing everyone against each other so much more profound and interesting. And those are the things that you don't really pick up on until you really start doing some analysis. But I was reading like Philip Caputo's book, Rumors of War, and about how that really relates strongly to what was happening in the new trilogy, about there is a war going on. Nobody back home really even wants to acknowledge that it's happening, but it's going to pop off and you guys should pay attention to it. And about how the pressures of getting shot at but not shooting back eventually break you as a human being and destroy you.
Published in 1977, Philip Caputo's A Rumor of War is a foundational memoir chronicling his service as a young Marine lieutenant during the early years of the Vietnam War. It details his transition from eager, patriotic volunteer to a disillusioned soldier and explores the brutal, confusing nature of guerrilla warfare in the jungles and examines how ordinary men are transformed by the violence of conflict.
And those themes, I think, were things that were teased at in Star Wars, especially in Clone Wars, that got really dark. And I wanted to do something more like that, but instead of focusing on clones and Jedi, focusing on the regular, everyday people that get caught up in this. Because in the Clone Wars, there was only like 3 or so million clones fighting, but there were hundreds of millions of regular people fighting. The vast majority of the people who fought in the Clone Wars were just regular people, but you don't really hear those stories, and you don't really hear the stories that came after, because in Star Wars lore, the Great Expansion, which they talk about in Andor, there were all these planets that were affiliated with the Empire, that were, paying heed to the Empire, paying tribute, paying taxes, but were not under the banner. And then there was this era known as the Great Expansion, where Palpatine solidifies the gains of the Empire. You are now all part of the Empire. Not everybody wanted to be. And that was the beginning of these rebel cells. And you really see it pop off beautifully in Andor, as in it's a little thing to a little thing to a little thing that leads to big things happening. And that is the exact setting that we put together of this tiny little planet that is changing the flag, and not everybody's a fan of it. But are the people that aren't a fan of it not a fan of it because they object to the Empire's methods, or are they not a fan of it because they're not getting as much money? And I wanted to play with that morally gray area while at the same time slowly introducing the idea that this kid who joins the army at 17, who is a diehard believer because of his family history fighting for the Republic, suddenly realizes this is not the Clone Wars at all,
Yeah. And it's interesting, that morally gray area, that's something that is fascinating to me because, we look around the world and we look at history, and history is full of nations imposing or attempting to impose their will on other nations, right? Cultures, value systems, economic systems, democracy, non-democracy, religious systems, what have you. And we see numerous examples throughout all of history, but certainly in the modern days, of this attempt to sort of reshape peoples and nations in the image of another nation. I think about, America in Iraq, right? American and the NATO in Afghanistan, in which Canada was part of that as well. These were attempts to reshape these countries in the form, frankly, of a Western style place, and it didn't work. And it's interesting because you're talking about these imperial, the expansion of that empire. And is it that they don't agree with the empire, or is it that they don't want someone coming in and just telling them how they're going to live? And it's that gray area. It's like, do you morally object to what the empire stands for? Maybe not. If they don't come in and just say, boots on the ground, you're doing what we say. And it's really interesting how that parallels so many examples of nation building, nation reconstruction that we see in the world around us, from Vietnam, of course, and onwards.
Nick Brockhausen, he was a Mac v SOG special forces guy during Vietnam. And he wrote 2 books about his experiences in Vietnam, which are just insane reads, called Whispers in the Tall Grass and We Few. We Few is the first one. Whispers in the Tall Grass is the second. And he talks about how you find local allies that can give you intel and you can work with. And in Vietnam, Nick Brockhausen refers to them as the little people. These are the people that are in the mountains. These are the people that are tribal people. They're not in the cities. They're not in the big cities in Vietnam, but they felt that their way of life was being threatened by the North Vietnamese. And so the special forces are inserted in with them. And so they've got these allies that they're working hand in hand with. In Vietnam, it was the little people, which is the term that Nick Brockhausen uses. And in Iraq, it was the Kurdish people. That war became unprofitable. They abandoned their allies. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And so in Star Wars, it's like, that's one thing that you've seen repeatedly about the way Andor did it. It feeds itself. You think you're in with them until you're no longer of use, and then they will put you down. Mm. And I think that Andor is the first time that I've really seen that perfectly displayed in Star Wars with Daedra.
In Andor, powerful forces use and discard allies depending on their need. For Fred, that's what happened in the US-led invasion of Iraq in 1991 to help liberate Kuwait, when Kurdish forces in northern Iraq believed the United States would support their efforts to overthrow Saddam Hussein. Encouraged by coalition rhetoric, the Kurds launched a major uprising alongside Shia rebels in the south. However, the US-led coalition stopped short of removing Saddam from power during the Gulf War, and that allowed his regime to crush the rebellions. Tens of thousands of Kurds were killed or displaced as nearly 2 million people fled toward the mountains bordering Turkey and Iran. The humanitarian disaster prompted the United States and its allies to establish a no-fly zone over northern Iraq, which allowed the Kurds to develop a largely autonomous region protected from Saddam's forces. The next generation of Kurdish fighters, the Peshmerga, became key allies in the overthrow of Saddam when the US invaded Iraq once again in 2003. Real-world events like Vietnam is what drove George Lucas to create Star Wars. It is also what fuels Fred's creative force and storytelling.
The thing about science fiction, whenever you're working on science fiction, it's a great way to hold a mirror to yourself. Mm-hmm. And there's all kinds of these fascinating little points in history. It's like the idea of history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes.
Oh yeah, my favorite saying.
Yeah, and I think that there's so many relatable moments in history that you can put into a fictional setting, because at the end of the day, people have been the same thing forever. No matter where you go in the world, people are dealing with predominantly the same moral quandaries, the same self-doubts and all that stuff. And we live in a time now where we're bombarded with the idea the end is nigh, the end is nigh. But you can find writings from Babylon, 8,000 years ago, with people saying everybody wants to be a poet. Children don't listen to their parents. And it's that line, every generation thinks the next generation is stupid. Oh, yeah. And I think that those themes are very, very prevalent. And I also love history is filled with these stunning examples where people have risen to the call. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And they've come from a situation where you would never see that person being a hero or doing something dramatically heroic. And maybe it's not even something that people talk about often enough, but like it's so profound how throughout history, no matter where you go around the world, no matter what culture, there are these moments of these like underdog people coming from nowhere and changing everything. And I think that if you're not impressed or awed by those stories, you really got to give your head a shake, man, because they're really cool, you know?
Since George Lucas, every other creative force behind Star Wars has done just that. Over nearly 5 decades, it has evolved and transformed filmmaking in the process. But woven into its DNA is our world, because Star Wars has always drawn from our universe as much as it has imagined a galaxy far, far away. It's a story of history inspiring fiction, and fiction in turn becoming history itself. Thank you for joining me this week, and a special thanks to Fearless Fred Kennedy. Please make sure to check out his show Mud 79, as well as check out his amazing comics. To find out more, please check out his Instagram, which we'll include in the show notes. Hostile History was written by me, David Borys, and produced by Curious Cast. Our producer was Dila Velasquez. Our audio producer and sound designer was Rob Johnston. Our executive producer is Chris Dunner Duncombe, the director of Curious Cast podcast for Curious Minds. Hostile History is part of the Canyon Entertainment umbrella. You can find Hostile History on Instagram by following our Canyon Entertainment page. You can find Hostile History on Facebook by searching and following Hostile History. Keep your powder dry.
Hello.
Look what TJ Maxx dragged in.
The Devil Wears Prada 2 is now streaming on Disney Plus and Hulu.
We are digital, we are downloadable, we are streamable.
The fashion event of the year is certified fresh.
Pull yourself together, we have work to do.
Critics say it's smart and witty and the perfect sequel.
That's all.
Get runway ready for The Devil Wears Prada 2 on Disney Plus and Hulu. Rated PG-13.